Why is Ethiopia engaging in conflicts with all its neighbors? Has Ethiopia historically had access to a seaport? Are we witnessing the emergence of another war front in the Horn of Africa? To understand all of this, let's explore the history of Ethiopia and its relationships with neighbors and how it gained and subsequently lost access to a port. Ethiopia and Eritrea were once part of the same kingdom of Aksum, according to history and ancient maps. The Kingdom of Aksum, which lasted from the 4th to the 7th century on the Horn of Africa, was a powerful and prominent state. It included areas of modern-day Ethiopia and Eritrea, as well as Yemen and Sudan. The Aksumite Empire was notable for its superior civilization, trading networks, and early 4th century acceptance of Christianity. Fast forward to the late 19th century, when European colonial powers began to show interest in the region. Italy was eager to build its own colonial empire. It wanted to expand its influence globally and make a strong presence. To achieve this goal, they spotted a strategic location along the coastal region of Eritrea, along the Red Sea. In the late 19th century, Ethiopia was led by Emperor Menelik II, a visionary leader who sought to modernize his country and maintain its independence. Italy, under the rule of King Umberto I, sought to expand its colonial influence in Africa and eyed Ethiopia as a potential territory. The Italian government, led by Prime Minister Francesco Crispi, engaged in diplomatic efforts with Ethiopia, and negotiations resulted in the signing of the Treaty of Wuchurel. But there were differences particularly in the Article 17. The Amharic version implied that Ethiopia had the option to conduct its foreign affairs through Italy, while the Italian version claimed Ethiopia was obliged to conduct all foreign affairs through Italy. When the Ethiopian Emperor, Menelik II, became aware of this interpretation, rejected the Italian interpretation and refused to accept the terms that compromised Ethiopian sovereignty. This disagreement eventually led to the outbreak of the First Italo-Ethiopian War in 1895. The conflict reached its climax at the Battle of Adwa on March 1, 1896, where Ethiopian forces, led by Emperor Menelik II, defeated the Italian army decisively. This victory secured Ethiopia's status as one of the few African nations to successfully resist European colonization during the scramble for Africa. In the aftermath of the war, the Treaty of Wuchurel was nullified, and Ethiopia maintained its independence. Despite Ethiopia's win, Italy retained control over Eritrea, signifying the commencement of Italian colonial influence in the region. In 1935, Italy, under the rule of Benito Mussolini, invaded Ethiopia in the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. Despite Ethiopia's resistance, Italy occupied the country, and the emperor, Haile Selassie, was forced into exile. During this period, Italy also merged Eritrea and Ethiopia into a single entity known as Italian East Africa. Ethiopia faced a tough situation during Italian occupation, especially with Italy taking control of not just Ethiopia but also Eritrea. This move by Italy meant Ethiopia lost important access to the sea, affecting its economy and geopolitical position. Fortunately, during World War II, Italian forces were defeated in East Africa, and by 1941, Ethiopia was liberated from occupation. However, after the war, issues remained about Eritrea's status. In 1952, the United Nations tried a federation between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Unfortunately, this arrangement didn't last long. In 1962, Emperor Haile Selassie of Ethiopia decided to annex Eritrea as a province. This decision triggered a prolonged armed struggle as Eritreans fought for their independence. The control over Eritrea did offer Ethiopia access to the Red Sea, a strategically crucial location for trade and geopolitical reasons. The turning point came during the Eritrean War of Independence, a conflict that spanned several years and ultimately led to Eritrea becoming an independent country in 1993. This significant shift not only altered the geopolitical landscape but also marked the end of Ethiopia's control over Eritrea and the beginning of a new chapter in the region's history. Eritrea finally gained its independence from Ethiopia in 1993. Following a prolonged struggle. Despite the end of hostilities, issues between the two countries persisted, leading to conflicts such as the Eritrean-Ethiopian War in 1998 to 2000. The historical complexities and geopolitical circumstances in the Horn of Africa are still affecting the relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea today. The prolonged conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea led to a stalemate, creating enduring tensions. As a result, Ethiopia, facing challenges in accessing the Red Sea, turned to Djibouti as its vital gateway since the 2000s. Strategically positioned at the entrance to the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden, Djibouti became Ethiopia's primary link for import and export activities. Still, this reliance incurred substantial annual losses in port fees, adding a burden to the economy of Ethiopia. In response to this economic strain, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed sought alternatives to reduce dependence on Djibouti. In 2018, a historic peace agreement was signed between Ethiopia and Eritrea, formally ending the long-standing state of war and re-establishing diplomatic and economic relations. It appears that the Ethiopian Prime Minister may have signed the 2018 Algiers Agreement, with the expectation of gaining access to the port of Assab in the event of restored peace with Eritrea. This intention might have persisted even if the agreement was not publicly disclosed. Nevertheless, matters took a surprise direction in 2020 when conflicts erupted in the Tigray region. This turned out to be the worst war in the 21st century, but the world focused mainly on what was happening in Europe and the Middle East. I'm planning to do a special video on the Tigray War based on deep research because it seems like there's not much information about it. If you want more videos like this, please hit the like and subscribe buttons to support the channel. The conflict in Tigray caused complications in the delicate relationship between Ethiopia and Eritrea. This renewed fighting is presenting extra challenges and obstacles, changing the course of the expectations set by the historic peace agreement of 2018. During a public meeting with businesspeople in July 2023, Ethiopia's Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, made a significant announcement. He emphasized the pressing issue of Ethiopia's landlocked status, expressing the need for the country to gain access to a port, whether through peaceful negotiations or, if necessary, through the use of force. Up until that point, Ethiopia had been grappling with the challenges of being geographically landlocked, hindering its ability to efficiently transport goods and participate in international trade. Abiy Ahmed's declaration reflected a sense of urgency and determination to address this long-standing issue that had hindered the nation's economic growth. In the meeting with businessmen, Abiy Ahmed underscored the importance of finding a viable solution to Ethiopia's landlocked dilemma. He acknowledged that the current situation was unsustainable and needed resolution for the country to thrive economically. The Prime Minister's words were met with a mix of concern and anticipation from the audience, as they recognized the gravity of the situation and the potential implications for Ethiopia's future. The announcement sparked widespread discussions both domestically and internationally, with analysts and policymakers closely monitoring developments in the region. As Ethiopia sought a pathway to access a port, the world awaited to see whether diplomatic negotiations would prevail or if the nation would resort to more forceful measures to secure its maritime interests. This pivotal moment in Ethiopia's history underscored the complexities of geopolitical dynamics and the delicate balance between peaceful resolutions and the potential for conflict. The story of Ethiopia's quest for a port unfolded against a backdrop of global attention, as stakeholders across the world observed and speculated on the country's strategic decisions in navigating its way out of being landlocked. Following these results, the Horn of Africa experienced rising tensions in the months leading up to the critical date, 1 January 2024. At this historic day, an unprecedented agreement was reached between the Ethiopian government, headed by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, and Somaliland President Musa Bihi Abdi. Under this historic accord, Ethiopia secured access to the port for cargo purposes and established a naval maritime base, reciprocated by its formal recognition of Somaliland as an independent and sovereign state. But why does Somaliland want to be recognized so desperately? To understand why Somaliland was so eager for recognition, one needs to understand the complicated historical links between Ethiopia, Somaliland, and Somalia. Somalia, with its strategic location along the Red Sea and Indian Ocean, attracted the attention of imperial forces. The British Empire, seeking to secure sea routes to India, established a protectorate in the north, British Somaliland, and an Italian colony in the south, Italian Somaliland. This division was formalized in the late 1800s and early 1900s. The borders drawn during the colonial era were arbitrary and often disregarded the ethnic and clan affiliations of the Somali people. As a consequence, the artificial boundaries became a source of tension and conflict. The Ogaden region of Ethiopia, predominantly inhabited by Somali-speaking people, was handed over to Ethiopia during the scramble for Africa. This decision sowed the seeds of future disputes and contributed to the desire for reunification among Somali communities on both sides of the border. After years of struggle against colonial rule, Somalia gained independence in 1960, merging the British and Italian territories into the Somali Republic. The year 1974 witnessed a major political shift and political transformation in Ethiopia. Mengistu Haile Mariam and a group of military officers executed a coup, overthrew Emperor Haile Selassie. Mengistu, who was extremely Marxist, assumed leadership, implementing radical reforms that included the nationalization of industries and a redistribution of land. In this ideological shift, Ethiopia also realigned its geopolitical stance, gravitating towards the Soviet Union. This geopolitical realignment was perceived as a threat by Western nations, especially the United States, who were engaged in a global ideological and strategic rivalry with the Soviet Union. The Horn of Africa, including Ethiopia, became a battleground for influence between the superpowers. The Soviet Union saw an opportunity to expand its sphere of influence in the region by supporting Marxist governments, while the United States sought to counter the spread of communism. Somalia, encouraged by this assistance, launched an invasion into the Ogaden in July 1977, aiming to annex the region. The initial advances made by Somali forces raised concerns in the international community and intensified the regional conflict. However, as the conflict unfolded, Ethiopia, backed by Soviet military aid and Cuban troops, mounted a counteroffensive. The Soviet Union's increased involvement in supporting Ethiopia marked a turning point in the conflict. Despite Somalia's early support from the West and Arab nations, the tide of the war shifted in favor of Ethiopia, leading to Somalia's eventual defeat. Ethiopia received significant military assistance from the Soviet Union, which included weaponry, advisors, and logistical support. Cuban troops also joined the conflict on the side of Ethiopia. As the battle grew more intense and Ethiopia gained momentum, the Soviet Union and Cuba played an important role in recommending caution. Despite military victories on the battlefield, notably after the critical Battle of Jijiga in March 1978, the Soviet Union and Cuba, aware of the greater geopolitical implications, advised Ethiopia not to advance farther into Somali territory. Diplomatic pressure from the Soviet Union and Cuba indicated a determination to keep the conflict from spreading beyond the Ogaden area. The Ogaden War eventually drew to a close, leaving Ethiopia in control of the Ogaden region but with enduring consequences for the region's geopolitics. Following the Ogaden War, Somalia encountered numerous challenges when its attempts to unite various tribes in the region failed. The nation descended into chaos, marked by militia activities and a coup that ousted the government in 1991. In response to the bloody situations, Somaliland, enjoying relative peace, felt compelled to separate from southern Somalia. It used the historical British boundaries as a foundation to declare itself an independent country. Frustrated with the chaos and violence engulfing southern Somalia after Barre's fall, Somaliland sought to establish stability and functional governance structures independently. The separation was driven by a desire to distance itself from the turmoil in southern Somalia and to avoid the widespread violence, piracy, and terrorism affecting other regions. Somaliland's commitment to democratic governance was evident through multiple free and fair elections, establishing a government and institutions that aimed to foster stability. Additionally, Somaliland pursued economic development and reconstruction efforts, attracting foreign investment and aid. The quest for international recognition as a sovereign state was viewed as crucial for further supporting its economic growth and development. Despite these efforts, Somaliland has faced challenges in gaining international recognition. The African Union's policy of non-recognition, coupled with opposition from Somalia, has hindered its progress. The lack of recognition limits Somaliland's access to international aid, trade, and diplomatic relations, despite its achievements in establishing relative stability and functioning governance structures. Now there's a big question looming: is Somaliland going to join forces with Ethiopia, Somalia's old enemy, to secure its independence? It's a tense situation, considering the history of conflicts between Ethiopia and Somalia, which date back to 1978. What if BRICS members support Ethiopia, and the US supports Somalia? This geopolitical tension could escalate, leading to a potential new war in the region.